Ladies and gentlemen, before motion, before conversation, before ambition, we align with God. Prayer is not a ritual, it is the gateway of authority. This morning we declare divine order over our steps, protection over our going out, favor speaking ahead of us. Let the light of God silence confusion. Let wisdom govern choices. Let grace empower diligence. We submit our minds, our work, our families to heaven's agenda, rejecting fear and delay. By the Spirit, doors open, helpers arise, and every assignment is clothed with peace, strength, and blessing. Prayer is the first language of alignment, the conscious decision of a believer to submit the day, the mind, and the destiny to the jurisdiction of heaven before engaging the earth. It is an acknowledgement that life responds more accurately when God is consulted first, not as an afterthought but as the source. When prayer comes first, confusion loses its authority because light has been invited early. Many people rush into activity and later look for divine approval, but spiritual intelligence demands that approval precedes activity. Prayer positions the heart to hear, the spirit to discern, and the will to obey. It is in that sacred moment of early surrender that authority is received, not borrowed, not assumed, but imparted. Alignment through prayer is not about speaking many words. It is about positioning the soul under divine government. When a man prays first, he is saying that outcomes matter more than speed, that accuracy is superior to haste. Prayer recalibrates perception so that decisions are not made merely from emotions, pressure, or convenience. It brings the believer into harmony with divine timing, where steps are ordered and efforts are multiplied. In prayer, the spirit man takes the lead while the flesh is silenced. This is why prayer before action preserves strength, because energy is not wasted on battles that were never assigned. Authority flows from alignment. In the realm of the spirit, authority is never claimed, it is recognized. Prayer is how heaven recognizes a man as submitted, and submission is the foundation of authority. When alignment is established, resistance becomes illegal. The believer who prays first does not beg circumstances. Circumstances respond. Prayer grants spiritual jurisdiction, giving the believer the right to legislate peace, wisdom, and favor into the day. This is not arrogance. It is obedience empowered by relationship. To pray first is to declare dependence on God over self-sufficiency. It is the confession that human intelligence, experience, and planning are insufficient without divine insight. Prayer dismantles pride quietly and replaces it with confidence rooted in God. This confidence is not noisy, it is steady. It produces calmness in the face of uncertainty and courage in moments that demand decision. When prayer goes first, anxiety loses its grip because the future has been committed into capable hands. Spiritual alignment through prayer. Many lives are disorganized not because of lack of effort, but because of lack of spiritual structure. Prayer brings structure to thoughts, emotions, and priorities. It aligns desires with purpose and separates distractions from assignments. In prayer, the believer gains clarity, understanding what to pursue and what to ignore. This clarity becomes a shield against unnecessary stress and confusion throughout the day. Prayer is also the place where authority over the atmosphere is established. Every day carries its own spiritual climate, and whoever discerns early governs better. When prayer is first, the atmosphere is conditioned by faith rather than fear. Words spoken in prayer shape the environment, commanding peace where chaos intends to rise, light where darkness seeks access. The believer who prays first does not react to the day reacts to the believer. Alignment through prayer connects the believer to divine resources. Strength, wisdom, favor, and protection are not random blessings. They are provisions released through relationship. Prayer activates access. It reminds the believer that help is not limited to human connections. When prayer comes first, angels are given assignments, grace is dispensed for tasks, and favor is positioned ahead of the believer. This makes progress smoother and resistance manageable. Prayer also trains spiritual sensitivity. By praying first, the believer becomes attentive to divine nudges throughout the day. Small instructions, warnings, and promptings become clearer because the Spirit has been engaged early. This sensitivity saves the believer from costly mistakes and missed opportunities. It is in prayer that the heart learns the language of God, making obedience less burdensome and more natural. The discipline of praying first builds consistency in spiritual authority. Authority that is exercised without consistency eventually weakens. Prayer sustains authority by keeping the believer connected to the source. It prevents burnout by renewing strength and perspective daily. Rather than relying on yesterday's grace, prayer draws fresh supply for today's demands. This daily renewal keeps the believer effective without becoming overwhelmed. To pray first is also an act of warfare. It is preemptive, not defensive. Instead of responding to attacks, prayer establishes victory before challenges appear. It fortifies the mind against negative thoughts, secures the emotions against instability, and guards the heart against offense. Prayer sets boundaries in the spirit realm, declaring what is permitted and what is forbidden. Ultimately, prayer as the first act of the day is a declaration of lordship. It says, God reigns over time, choices, relationships, and outcomes. It aligns the believer's will with divine purpose and places the day under heavenly command. This alignment produces confidence, stability, and quiet strength, allowing the believer to walk through the day conscious of divine backing, knowing that every step is supervised, every decision supported, every effort sustained by grace, every moment anchored in purpose, moving forward with assurance, clarity, and spiritual authority under divine alignment. Inviting divine protection over thoughts, actions, and decisions begins with the understanding that life is not neutral and days are not empty containers. Every day carries influences, voices, pressures, and unseen engagements that seek access to the mind first. Protection is therefore not merely about safety from physical harm, it is about guarding the gateways of perception. When the mind is unguarded, decisions become vulnerable. Divine protection starts from the inner man, where thoughts are filtered, intentions are purified, and clarity is preserved. This is why a believer must be intentional about committing the thought life to God before the day unfolds. Thoughts are the womb of actions. Whatever is permitted to grow in the mind will eventually manifest in behavior. Inviting divine protection over thoughts is an act of wisdom, acknowledging that not every thought is harmless and not every idea is inspired. Through prayer, the believer places a watch over the mind, rejecting fear, doubt, offense, and distraction. Divine protection fortifies the mind with truth, ensuring that reactions are measured and responses are governed by wisdom rather than impulse. A protected mind becomes a place of peace even in demanding environments. Protection over actions flows naturally from protection over thoughts. Actions are the visible expression of invisible decisions already made within. When God's covering rests upon actions, mistakes are minimized and accuracy is increased. This does not imply perfection, but it ensures correction comes early and damage is limited. Divine protection guides the believer away from unnecessary risks and aligns actions with purpose. It brings restraint where emotions want to rush and boldness where fear wants to delay. Every action carries consequences, and divine protection helps ensure those consequences are favorable. By committing actions to God, the believer invites divine supervision over daily conduct. Words spoken, steps taken, and choices made are influenced by the Spirit rather than circumstance. This kind of protection keeps relationships from unnecessary conflict and preserves reputation in moments of misunderstanding. It shields the believer from traps disguised as opportunities and preserves integrity in situations that test character. Decisions are among the most powerful expressions of human responsibility. One decision can alter direction, destiny, and outcomes. Inviting divine protection over decisions is an admission that human judgment alone is limited. Through prayer, the believer submits choices to divine wisdom, asking not only what is good but what is right and timely. Divine protection ensures that decisions align with long-term purpose rather than short-term comfort. It saves the believer from regret by granting foresight and discernment. Protected decisions carry peace even before results appear. When a decision is made under divine covering, there is an inner assurance that transcends external uncertainty. This peace is a witness of alignment. It guards the heart against second-guessing and fear of failure. Even when challenges arise, the believer remains steady, knowing the decision was not made in isolation, but under divine counsel. Divine protection also extends to unseen dangers. There are battles the believer never encounters because prayer intercepted them early. When thoughts, actions, and decisions are covered, the believer is preserved from accidents, delays, and misalignments that are invisible to the natural eye. This is the silent ministry of divine protection, working behind the scenes to ensure continuity and progress. Inviting protection is not a passive act, it is an active declaration of faith. It is saying that God's presence is welcome in the ordinary details of life. Many people reserve prayer for crises, but wisdom invites God into routine decisions and daily movements. This consistent invitation creates an atmosphere where danger struggles to find access. Divine protection thrives in environments of acknowledgement and dependence. Protection over thoughts also empowers emotional stability. Emotions are often influenced by unchecked thoughts, and when the mind is protected, emotions follow order. This stability allows the believer to respond to pressure with maturity and patience. It prevents reactions that could damage relationships or derail assignments. Emotional balance becomes a testimony of divine covering at work within. Divine protection does not remove responsibility, it enhances it. The believer remains accountable for choices, but gains the advantage of divine guidance. This partnership ensures that effort is not wasted and energy is directed effectively. Protection refines focus, helping the believer invest time and strength where it matters most. When actions are protected, productivity increases. The believer finds grace to complete tasks efficiently without unnecessary struggle. Delays are reduced, confusion is minimized, and excellence becomes attainable. Divine protection brings favor that smooths processes and opens doors that human effort alone could not access. Inviting protection over decisions also guards destiny. Small decisions accumulate into large outcomes, and divine protection ensures that each step contributes positively to the larger picture. The believer avoids detours that consume years and enters paths that accelerate purpose. This is not coincidence. It is divine oversight responding to prayerful submission. Protection over thoughts, actions, and decisions ultimately produces confidence. The believer moves through the day with assurance, not arrogance, knowing that life is being navigated with divine assistance. This confidence reduces fear of failure and strengthens resilience. Even when mistakes occur, divine protection ensures restoration rather than destruction. This daily invitation of divine protection builds spiritual awareness. The believer becomes conscious of God's involvement in every aspect of life. Ordinary moments are infused with significance, and routine actions become acts of obedience. This awareness sustains faith and deepens relationship with God. Divine protection also creates consistency. Rather than fluctuating between spiritual sensitivity and negligence, the believer maintains a steady posture of dependence. This consistency strengthens spiritual authority and ensures lasting impact. Over time, life reflects the order and peace that come from being continually covered. Inviting divine protection is therefore not optional. It is essential for a life of purpose and effectiveness. It safeguards the inner world, directs the outer actions, and anchors decisions in wisdom. It preserves joy, protects peace, and ensures progress. This protection does not isolate the believer from challenges, but equips them to overcome with clarity, strength, and stability. moving forward with guarded thoughts, intentional actions, and well-aligned decisions under divine covering. Walking through each moment conscious of heavenly oversight, sustained by wisdom, restrained by grace, and preserved by divine protection operating continually within and around the believer. Activating favor and grace for daily assignments begins with the understanding that effort alone is not enough to produce lasting results. Life responds not only to diligence, but to spiritual advantage. Favor is that invisible force that causes help to find you, access to be granted you, and resistance to be softened around you. Grace is the divine enablement that empowers a person to do with ease what would otherwise demand strain. When favor and grace are activated, assignments are no longer carried by strength alone, but by divine support working alongside human responsibility. Every day carries assignments, whether recognized or ignored. Some assignments are obvious, such as work, responsibilities, and commitments, while others are subtle, involving conversations, decisions, and opportunities that shape destiny quietly. Activating favor and grace ensures that these assignments are met with accuracy rather than trial and error. It positions the believer to function beyond limitation, where results exceed effort and outcomes surpass expectations. Favor is not luck, and grace is not permission to be careless. Favor is the reward of alignment, and grace is the supply for obedience. When a believer consciously invites favor and grace into the day, they are acknowledging that success is spiritual before it is physical. This awareness shifts the mindset from striving to trusting, from anxiety to confidence. It allows the believer to approach tasks with peace, knowing that divine backing is present. Grace empowers consistency. Many people begin assignments with enthusiasm but lack the strength to finish well. Grace supplies endurance, sustaining focus and discipline even when motivation fades. It renews strength in moments of weariness and sharpens clarity when pressure increases. Grace ensures that assignments are not abandoned midway due to frustration or fatigue. It keeps the believer steady, productive, and resilient. Favor, on the other hand, works on the external environment. It influences people, systems, and circumstances to align for progress. When favor is activated, the believer encounters goodwill where hostility was expected and cooperation where resistance was assumed. Favor opens doors that qualifications alone cannot open and preserves opportunities that effort alone could not secure. It causes the right people to notice the right things at the right time. Daily assignments often involve interactions with others, and favor plays a critical role in relationships. It softens hearts, builds trust, and creates harmony. Favor allows words to be received with understanding rather than offense. It turns ordinary interactions into strategic connections. Through favor, the believer experiences acceptance without compromise and influence without manipulation. Grace also refines skill. It enhances learning, improves performance, and multiplies capacity. Tasks that once seemed overwhelming become manageable under grace. This is because grace does not merely add strength, it adds insight. It teaches the believer how to work wisely, not just hard. Grace reveals shortcuts that do not compromise excellence and strategies that conserve energy. Activating favor and grace requires humility. Pride resists grace, but humility attracts it. By acknowledging dependence on God, the believer positions themselves to receive divine assistance. This humility does not weaken confidence. It strengthens it by anchoring it in God rather than self. It allows the believer to ask for help without shame and to receive correction without offense. Daily assignments are often time-bound, and grace helps manage time effectively. Under grace, priorities become clear, distractions lose power, and focus is sharpened. The believer learns to invest time where it yields the highest return. This efficiency reduces stress and increases productivity, allowing more to be accomplished without exhaustion. Favor also provides protection within assignments. It shields the believer from unnecessary conflict, preserves reputation, and guards against sabotage. When favor rests upon a person, even mistakes are met with mercy, and shortcomings are covered with understanding. This does not encourage negligence, but provides room for growth and learning without harsh consequences. Grace empowers excellence. It lifts the quality of output beyond average. Work done under grace carries distinction, not because of perfection, but because of divine influence. Excellence under grace is sustainable, not draining. It allows the believer to maintain high standards without burnout. Activating favor and grace transforms perspective. Challenges are seen as opportunities for divine intervention rather than obstacles. Pressure becomes a platform for grace to manifest. The believer learns to expect help rather than hardship, solutions rather than confusion. This expectation fuels faith and sustains hope. Favor also accelerates progress. What might take others years can be achieved in a shorter time under favor. This acceleration is not unjust. It is the reward of alignment and obedience. Favor redeems time lost and restores opportunities missed. It causes momentum to build where stagnation once existed. Grace sustains character during success. When assignments yield results, grace keeps the believer grounded. It prevents pride from corrupting progress and ensures that success does not become a snare. Grace teaches the believer to steward results responsibly, honoring God in outcomes as much as in effort. Daily activation of favor and grace builds spiritual confidence. The believer becomes conscious of divine partnership in every task. This awareness eliminates fear of inadequacy and comparison. The focus shifts from competing with others to fulfilling purpose. Favor and grace also enhance decision-making within assignments. Choices are made with wisdom rather than pressure. The believer knows when to advance and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent. This discernment protects assignments from premature exposure and preserves strength for the right moments. Activating favor and grace is a daily discipline, not a one-time event. Each day presents new demands and fresh opportunities for divine assistance. By continually inviting favor and grace, the believer remains aligned with heaven's supply. This alignment ensures that assignments are met with sufficiency, wisdom, and strength. When favor and grace operate together, life becomes balanced. Effort is matched with ease, responsibility with support, and ambition with peace. The believer advances without strain, achieves without anxiety, and serves without depletion. Assignments are completed with joy rather than pressure, and progress becomes consistent rather than occasional. This activation creates a rhythm of success rooted in dependence on God. It trains the believer to expect divine involvement in ordinary tasks and extraordinary moments alike. Over time, life reflects the evidence of grace at work and favor at play, revealing a journey marked by steady growth, meaningful impact, increasing effectiveness, and a continual experience of divine assistance guiding every assignment, strengthening every effort, influencing every interaction, and sustaining momentum as the believer moves forward with confidence, clarity, and assurance under the operation of favor and grace continually at work. Walking consciously in God's presence throughout the day is the art of sustained awareness, a deliberate practice of recognizing that God is not confined to moments of prayer, but is actively involved in every second of life. It begins with the understanding that divine presence is not something to be invited occasionally, but something to be acknowledged continually. When a believer becomes conscious of God's presence, life is no longer divided into spiritual and ordinary moments. Every activity becomes an opportunity for communion and obedience. Conscious awareness of God's presence refines behavior naturally. When the heart knows it is seen, heard, and guided, actions align without force. This awareness cultivates integrity, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Choices are made with greater care because the believer understands that every decision unfolds before God. This awareness produces consistency, ensuring that private conduct aligns with public expression. Walking in God's presence stabilizes the mind. Many anxieties arise from the feeling of being alone in responsibility, but divine presence removes isolation. The believer is reminded that no challenge is faced alone and no burden is carried without support. This realization brings calmness in the midst of pressure and clarity in moments of uncertainty. The mind rests in the assurance that God is near, attentive, and involved. Daily consciousness of God's presence enhances sensitivity to guidance. Small promptings become noticeable, and subtle instructions are recognized. The believer learns to pause internally, to listen before reacting. This sensitivity protects against impulsive decisions and unnecessary conflict. It allows the believer to respond wisely rather than emotionally, preserving peace and effectiveness throughout the day. Walking with God's presence transforms routine activities into meaningful experiences. Work, conversations, and responsibilities are infused with purpose. The believer no longer sees tasks as mere obligations, but as opportunities to honor God through excellence and diligence. This perspective elevates ordinary labor into acts of worship, making fulfillment possible even in demanding schedules. Awareness of God's presence also strengthens resilience. When difficulties arise, the believer draws strength from the assurance of divine companionship. Trials no longer feel overwhelming because God's nearness provides comfort and courage. This presence becomes an anchor, preventing discouragement from taking root. Even in moments of weakness, the believer finds renewed strength through conscious reliance on God. Walking consciously with God guards the heart against distraction. In a world filled with noise and competing demands, awareness of divine presence refocuses priorities. The believer learns to filter distractions, giving attention to what truly matters. This focus enhances productivity and preserves spiritual sensitivity, ensuring that the heart remains aligned despite external pressures. God's presence also purifies motives. When the believer remains aware of God throughout the day, intentions are examined naturally. Actions are not driven solely by recognition or reward, but by a desire to please God. This purity of motive produces authenticity and prevents compromise. It keeps the believer grounded, even when success or praise increases. Conscious fellowship with God nurtures gratitude. Awareness of divine presence highlights blessings that might otherwise be overlooked. Small victories, moments of peace, and unexpected help become reasons for thanksgiving. This gratitude shifts perspective, replacing complaint with appreciation. It sustains joy and fosters contentment regardless of circumstances. Walking in God's presence also promotes humility. The believer recognizes dependence on divine grace for every outcome. This humility does not diminish confidence. It strengthens it by rooting it in God rather than self. It encourages teachability and openness to correction, allowing continuous growth and refinement. God's presence influences relationships. The believer becomes more patient, compassionate, and understanding. Awareness that God is present in interactions tempers speech and guides responses. It reduces conflict and fosters harmony. Relationships become platforms for demonstrating love, wisdom, and grace rather than arenas for competition or offense. Sustained awareness of God's presence sharpens spiritual discernment. The believer becomes alert to spiritual atmospheres and influences. This discernment provides protection against deception and misalignment. It ensures that decisions are not made solely based on appearance but on spiritual insight. Walking with God's presence also reinforces faith. As the believer consistently acknowledges God throughout the day, trust deepens. Past experiences of God's faithfulness strengthen confidence for future challenges. Faith becomes practical, expressed in daily dependence rather than occasional declarations. God's presence brings order to emotions. Emotional fluctuations are stabilized by the assurance of divine nearness. Joy becomes less dependent on circumstances, and peace remains steady even in uncertainty. This emotional stability enhances relationships, productivity, and spiritual effectiveness. Conscious awareness of God's presence transforms how time is used. Moments are valued and opportunities are stewarded wisely. The believer becomes intentional, avoiding wastefulness and procrastination. Time is seen as a gift entrusted by God, encouraging discipline and purpose. Walking in God's presence also empowers courage. When fear attempts to dominate, awareness of God's nearness emboldens the believer. Challenges are faced with confidence, and obedience is pursued despite risk. This courage is not reckless, but rooted in trust. Sustained fellowship with God cultivates inner peace. This peace is not the absence of trouble, but the presence of God within trouble. It guards the heart and mind, preventing anxiety from overwhelming the believer. Peace becomes a constant companion rather than a fleeting experience. Walking consciously in God's presence shapes identity. The believer becomes secure in who they are in God, reducing the need for external validation. This security fosters authenticity and resilience. Life is lived from a place of acceptance rather than striving. This continuous awareness creates a lifestyle of communion rather than isolated spiritual moments. It teaches the believer to live attentively, responsively, and reverently. God's presence becomes the backdrop of every activity, influencing thoughts, guiding actions, shaping decisions, strengthening faith, stabilizing emotions, refining character, sustaining joy, increasing wisdom, and anchoring the believer in a daily walk marked by closeness, obedience, confidence, and spiritual consciousness that remains active from morning to night, shaping every experience, every interaction, every response, and every step taken in awareness of divine companionship and guidance throughout the entire day.